Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The first time my father ever stormed into my office like that, red-faced and spit flying out of his mouth with every word, I honestly thought someone had died. I mean really died, not metaphorically or financially, but a heart-stopped, cold body kind of dead. His voice echoed against the glass walls like thunder ricocheting through a canyon, rattling the awards on my bookshelf and the half-drunk coffee on my desk. "What the hell did you do?" he screamed, hands clenched like he was ready to punch a hole in the drywall. I didn't flinch. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him and slowly turned my eyes to the polished brass nameplate screwed into the dark walnut of my office door. It read, Sarah Monroe, Vice President, Harper Contract. Then I looked back at him and said nothing. The silence was louder than anything I could have screamed. But let me rewind. My name is Sarah Monroe. For 35 years, I played the quiet one, the good daughter, the family peacekeeper, the one who never made trouble or asked for more. I didn't slam doors growing up. I didn't wreck cars or sneak boys into my bedroom or start drama at Thanksgiving. That was never my style. And it didn't need to be. Because I had a brother. Jacob Monroe. Golden boy. Star athlete. Homecoming king. Graduated from Mizzou with a business degree and just enough swagger to sell snow to Minnesotans in January. He was the chosen one from the start. I remember once, when I was maybe 10 or 11, I had gotten a B+ in math, and I brought it home like it was the Nobel Prize. I was beaming, expecting at least a good job, honey, from Dad. But instead, he glanced at it for 2 seconds, then muttered, "Well, Jacob never got less than an A." And just like that, the joy sucked right out of me like air from a tire. He used to say it all the time, my dad, I mean. "Your brother's the responsible one. He'll run the business someday." Like it was biblical prophecy. Like God himself had written it on a stone tablet and handed it down with a wink. So I stayed quiet. I stayed out of the way. I studied hard, got into WashU, majored in finance, graduated cum laude while Jacob was off partying his way through undergrad and somehow still landing a 6-figure job in Chicago straight out of college. But when our dad finally decided to start transitioning Monroe Tools and supply over to the next generation, did he even look at me? Did he ask what I wanted? Did he so much as consider that I'd been working the books every weekend since I was 19, helping mom stay on top of payroll, inventory, and vendor deadlines? Nope. He handed the reins right over to Jacob like it was already a done deal. Said I could support where needed, which is rich, considering I was the one who helped him recover after the pandemic nearly gutted our commercial accounts. I should have been angry. I should have walked out. But I didn't. I stayed. I nodded. I smiled. I let Jacob take the corner office and throw buzzwords around in meetings while I handled the actual goddamn spreadsheets. Let me tell you something. When people underestimate you long enough, it becomes a weapon. Silence becomes your armor. Patience becomes your sword. And watching someone fly too close to the sun on wings they didn't earn? That's just delicious. The funny thing is, Jacob never even noticed. He strutted around like a rooster in a henhouse, always dressed like he was on his way to an audition for Shark Tank, tight navy suits, overpriced watches, teeth so white they looked like they were battery-powered. His girlfriend Melissa wasn't much different, always in heels too high for a warehouse, recording TikToks in our front office like it was a WeWork in LA. She called herself a branding consultant, but honestly, I think she was just bored and had a ring light. Now, here's where things got interesting. About a week before Dad's meltdown, I was in the family office on a Saturday, nothing unusual. I like working weekends. It's quiet. No one breathing down my neck, no one asking for favors. Melissa had clearly been there earlier because her Louis Vuitton bag was on the desk and her makeup was scattered around like a CVS explosion. I didn't touch anything. But as I sat down to print some invoices, I noticed her iPad still open on the desk, screen glowing in sleep mode. I ignored it at first. I really did. But then I glanced over and saw a spreadsheet. And not just any spreadsheet. It had a Monroe Supply logo in the top left corner and rows upon rows of what looked like company payments to something called NovaStream Holdings, LLC. That name? Didn't ring a damn bell. And I know every vendor we deal with like I know my own heartbeat. Curiosity isn't a sin. It's survival. So I tapped the screen and started reading. First 5 entries? $50,000. Each. Labeled as marketing expenditures. But there were no attached invoices. No campaign reports. No contact names. Nothing. Just line after line of big money disappearing into a company I'd never even heard Jacob mention. That was the moment I felt something twist in my gut. Something heavy and electric. Because either Jacob was laundering money, or he was using our family business, our name, to fund some side hustle he didn't want anyone to know about. I didn't say anything that day. Didn't even breathe a word to Mom or Dad. I just took a photo of the screen with my phone, slid the iPad back where I found it, and walked out like nothing had happened. But I already knew. I knew this wasn't just arrogance or recklessness. This was betrayal. And not just of the business, but of me. Of all the times I stayed quiet, all the years I swallowed my pride just to keep the peace. You want to know the real kicker? I never asked for the throne. But turns out, sometimes it just falls right into your lap, after someone torches it. I didn't sleep the night I found that spreadsheet, didn't even try. I lay in bed staring up at the cracked ceiling of my old childhood bedroom, the one with faded glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck above the headboard like I was 13 again and still believed that staying invisible made me safe. But now, invisibility wasn't a shield, it was a strategy. Jacob had always counted on me staying in the background, counted on me being the one who'd never raise hell, even when the walls were crumbling. And maybe I had been that person for too damn long. But not anymore. The next morning, I poured myself a mug of black coffee so strong it could strip paint off a truck bumper, sat down at my home laptop, and started digging. I didn't go in blind. I knew how to pull records, how to sort invoice codes, how to track every cent that passed through the Monroe Supply accounts. Hell, I was the one who built half of our digital ledgers when Dad finally decided to crawl out of the paper age and modernize. What Jacob didn't count on was the fact that I'd set up mirrored logs, quiet little backups that saved every change, every deletion, every shady adjustment someone might try to sneak past. It started with those NovaStream Holdings entries. I cross-checked vendor IDs and came up empty. Then I looked into bank routing information and found something that made the hairs on my arms stand straight. The receiving account wasn't a vendor at all. It was personal. Not registered to the company. Not even to Jacob directly. It was tied to a shell corporation with a Delaware address and a contact email with a Gmail domain. No phone number. No website. Nothing that screamed legitimacy. Just wires and zeros and a name no one dared ask about. And the amounts. Jesus. We weren't talking small potatoes. Over the last 3 weeks, there were multiple transfers, 5 entries of $50,000 each, 2 more for $25,000, and 1 loan transaction for $80,000. Altogether, it was close to $250,000. That's like, what, $25,000? Wait, no, that's not right. Damn. Whatever it wasn't some rounding error or innocent budgeting mistake. This was intentional. Calculated. And worst of all, hidden in plain sight under fake marketing expenses no one ever double-checked because, well, why would they? Jacob had been funneling money out of Monroe Supply like it was his personal ATM, and if that crypto startup of his went belly up or got slapped with federal charges, which, by the looks of it, was not just possible but inevitable, we wouldn't just lose our biggest contracts. We'd lose everything. Licensing, legacy, reputation, gone in the time it takes a federal auditor to hit print. The question sat heavy in my chest, like a brick in a glass bowl. What the hell do I do now? I must have stared at my screen for over an hour, the cursor blinking back at me like it was daring me to be brave. There was no easy way out of this. If I kept my mouth shut, we might survive, at least until the IRS or Tom Harper's legal team figured it out for themselves. But that would mean I'd be complicit. That would mean I'd be just as dirty as Jacob. And after everything, after the decades of being dismissed, talked over, sidelined, I couldn't let him take us down while pretending to be the goddamn hero. But saying something meant breaking everything. It meant watching my dad's heart shatter, meant watching Mom retreat further into her quiet corner of the world, maybe even meant Jacob getting arrested. It meant making the family business, our name, bleed in public. And I wasn't naive. I knew how fast reputations rot, especially in small towns like ours, where everyone knows what you had for breakfast and how often your trash bins are full. So I took a breath. Then I took another. And then I opened a clean Word doc and started compiling everything. Screenshots, transaction histories, vendor lists, comparative audits. Every piece of digital evidence I could find that painted the picture clear as day. I didn't editorialize. I didn't speculate. I just built the case like I was laying bricks, carefully, methodically, with every intention of it standing long after the first hammer swung. When I finished, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I printed it all out over 70 pages and stapled them into a thick folder that bulged like a loaded gun. I slid it into a manila envelope and wrote one name on the front, in all caps, confidential, Tom Harper. Because if anyone could make Jacob sweat, it was Tom. He wasn't just our biggest client, he was the kind of man who believed in handshakes over contracts, and once you broke his trust, you were done. Blacklisted. Dead in the water. That envelope sat on my desk for the rest of the day. I didn't touch it. I didn't even look at it. I just let it sit there, pulsing like a live wire, humming with the weight of every unspoken word I'd swallowed over the years. I knew what would happen once it left my hands. I knew there was no walking it back. But I also knew this, my silence wasn't a kindness anymore. It was a goddamn liability. The diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed in 30 years, and that's exactly why I picked it. Vinyl booths with worn corners, laminated menus that stuck to your fingers in July, and waitresses who called everyone Han whether they liked it or not. I got there early, took a booth near the back, facing the entrance, because I knew Tom Harper would want to skin the room before sitting down. That was just how he operated, old school, no bullshit, straight down the line. He didn't do Zoom meetings. He didn't text. If you wanted to say something to Tom Harper, you said it to his face. Over eggs and black coffee, preferably before 9 a.m. I had the envelope with me, tucked inside my work bag under a stack of folders, and every time I reached down to sip my coffee, I could feel its weight like a brick pressed against my ribs. It wasn't the paper that was heavy, it was the fallout it could bring. The moment I handed that file across the table, there'd be no more pretending, no more protecting, no more hoping Jacob would grow up and become the man Dad always thought he was. I wasn't just pulling back the curtain, I was ripping the damn thing off the rod and setting it on fire. Tom walked in at 8:05, right on time, in his usual pressed khakis and navy windbreaker, looking like the kind of man who'd spent his whole life getting up before the sun. He nodded once when he saw me, didn't smile, didn't waste time. He sat down, ordered coffee, black, and whatever she's having, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "So what's this about?" I didn't try to warm him up. No small talk. No easing in. I reached into the bag, pulled out the envelope, and slid it across the table like I was handing him a loaded weapon, which, in a way, I was. He didn't open it right away. Just stared at the name written on the front, then raised an eyebrow at me like he was giving me one last chance to back out. I didn't. He opened it, skimmed the first few pages, and then something shifted in his face, something small, but sharp. Like a nerve firing beneath skin. He didn't say anything for a while. Just kept turning pages, his thick fingers moving slower the deeper he got into the evidence. By the time he reached the spreadsheet breakdowns and traced the fake invoices to Jacob's little crypto empire, he exhaled hard through his nose and muttered, "Jesus Christ." That's when I knew I'd hit the nerve. Not just surprise, disgust. Betrayal. Harper had been with our family business for almost 15 years. He trusted my father. He trusted us. And now Jacob had made him look like a fool by dragging him into something shady and unstable without even a courtesy call. Still, when Tom finally looked up at me again, his voice didn't rise. He didn't throw the folder or curse or make a scene. No, that wasn't his style. His fury came cold and controlled, the kind that moves like a glacier and destroys everything in its path without ever raising its voice. "You did the right thing," he said. "I'll handle it." And just like that, the meeting was over. I left the diner without finishing my breakfast. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline, the kind that only comes when you finally jump off the ledge you've been staring at for years. I didn't know what Harper meant exactly by handle it, but I had a feeling I'd find out soon enough. And I was right. The next morning, Monroe Supply was humming with whispers before I even parked my car. Something had gone down in the executive meeting. Jacob had been called in early, before business hours, which never happened unless it was serious. By the time I got upstairs, he was already gone. The boardroom door was swinging shut behind him, and he looked like a man who'd just been sucker punched in the stomach. Face flushed, jaw clenched, tie loosened like a noose coming undone. He didn't even look at me when we passed in the hallway. Just kept walking, fast and furious, like if he didn't move quickly enough, the shame would catch up and swallow him whole. By noon, I got the call. Tom's assistant. Calm, polite, professional. She said Mr. Harper would like to move forward with transferring the Harper contract directly under my supervision, effective immediately. That meant handling purchasing, overseeing fulfillment, and maintaining sole client liaison status. In other words, it was the most important account we had. And it was mine now. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood up, walked down the hall, and opened the door to what used to be Jacob's office. His name had already been scraped off the frosted glass. The room smelled like stale cologne and something vaguely synthetic, probably the remnants of Melissa's perfume. I stepped behind the desk, lowered myself into the leather chair, and rested my hands on the edge of the mahogany surface like it belonged to me all along. And for the first time in my life, it did. I didn't have long to enjoy it, though, because not 5 minutes later, the office door swung open with such force it hit the wall behind it. My father stood there, breathing like he'd run the whole length of the building. His face was redder than I'd ever seen it, redder even than that time he caught Jacob sneaking beer into the 4th of July picnic when we were teenagers. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted, voice sharp enough to slice glass. I didn't rise. I didn't shrink. I just turned to face him, calmly, as if we were discussing Monday's budget report instead of the detonation of the family dynamic. I didn't even need to speak, not yet, because between us stood the silence of everything I'd always wanted to say but never had. The truth was in my eyes. And if he couldn't see it now, he never would. My father's voice hit the walls of that office like a thunderclap that didn't echo. It simply sank into every surface and stayed there, vibrating between the floorboards and my bones. "What the hell did you do?" he yelled again, as if repeating the question would change the answer or slow down the blood rush pounding behind his temples. He looked at me like I had betrayed something sacred, like I'd walked into his church and pissed on the altar. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, steady and grounded behind the desk that used to be Jacob's until about 24 hours ago, my hands folded on the same mahogany surface he once leaned across like a king holding court. Dad's face was flushed, not with the fire of rage, but with something colder, something that looked suspiciously like fear trying to dress itself up as indignation. His fists were balled, not because he was about to throw one, but because he had nothing left to hold onto. Not the illusion. Not the pride. Not the fantasy he'd spent the last 20 years writing in stone. The one where Jacob was the leader and I was the loyal foot soldier who knew her place. I didn't answer him right away. I gave him a beat to stew in it, to look around and register that the room wasn't the same. The lighting hadn't changed, the furniture hadn't moved, but everything inside it, everything was different now. Then I stood up slowly, deliberately, and stepped around the desk without a single unnecessary motion. I walked to the office door, gripped the handle, and opened it wide enough for him to see the brass nameplate affixed clean and straight beside the frame. I tapped it with my knuckle. Just once. Just enough. "Sarah Monroe," I said, reading it aloud like I was reciting scripture. "Vice President, Harper contract." For a second, he just stood there like he didn't understand the language I was speaking. Like the letters hadn't registered, or maybe he thought it was temporary, a joke, some cruel mistake that he could correct by marching down the hall and demanding the world put itself back in order. I could see the way his eyes twitched toward the plate again, trying to rewrite what he'd read, trying to make it say something else. Jacob Monroe, Director of Operations, anything but what it said. Anything but my name. "You went behind our backs," he said, this time quieter but no less accusing, like a man who's been sucker-punched and is trying to catch his breath without showing weakness. "You humiliated your brother. You made us look like liars in front of Harper." "No," I said plainly, finally walking back to my chair. "Jacob humiliated himself. I just gave Tom the truth, something we should have done years ago." His jaw twitched like he wanted to argue, but he had nothing solid to stand on anymore. No excuses. No plausible deniability. Just the facts, cold, ugly, undeniable. And for the first time since I was a teenager, I saw something flicker across his face that wasn't disappointment in me, but disappointment in himself. A crack in the wall. A sliver of regret. But he wouldn't say it out loud. That wasn't his way. He was raised in a generation where silence was currency and pride meant never admitting you'd been wrong, even when the proof was etched into polished metal right outside your son's old office. "You always thought silence meant weakness," I said softly, meeting his eyes now, letting every word land like a slow drip on hot iron. But I was just waiting until I didn't have to raise my voice. And there it was the moment the air between us changed, not with heat or noise, but with realization. His shoulders dropped half an inch. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked around the room, maybe seeing it the way I had for years, not as a place of power, but as a battlefield of overlooked work, buried credit, and silent sacrifice. This had never been about titles for me. It had been about truth. About justice. About finally being seen, not because I demanded it, but because I'd earned it. He didn't argue again. He didn't apologize either. But when he turned to leave, I saw hesitation in his steps. Like a man who knew he'd built his house on the wrong foundation and was only now beginning to understand just how deep the cracks went. After he left, I sat back down, not to gloat, but to breathe for the first time in months. Maybe even years. But that peace didn't last long. My phone buzzed on the desk. It wasn't from a saved number. Just a string of digits, unfamiliar and jagged like broken glass. I picked it up, expecting some follow-up from Harper's office, or maybe a paper pusher from accounting trying to get ahead of next week's disaster. But the message was short. No greeting. No signature. Just 12 words that punched through my chest like a nail gun through drywall. "You think this is over? You have no idea what he's really into." I stared at the screen, so long the display dimmed, then went black. And suddenly I realized something awful. This wasn't the end of the story. This was just the part where the real game began. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't settle. It hovers, clinging to the air like dust you can't wipe clean. And after that anonymous text showed up on my phone, that's exactly what it felt like every time I walked into the office. Not just silence, but suspicion. Like the walls themselves knew something I didn't yet. For 2 days I stared at that message without responding, without showing it to anyone, without even mentioning it to Harper or the auditors combing through Jacob's old accounts. I told myself it was just someone trying to rattle me, maybe a desperate friend of Jacob's or some faceless troll who caught wind of the fallout and decided to stir the pot. But something about it felt different. It wasn't threatening, it was a warning. A breadcrumb. A dare. So I did what I do best. I got to work. I went back into the ledgers, this time not just looking at transfers, but tracing the logic, or lack of it, behind our financing lines and capital reserves. What I found didn't scare me immediately. It confused me first. Then it stunned me. Then it made me sick to my stomach. Because the crypto scheme? That wasn't the end of Jacob's little hustle. It was the cover story, the tip of the goddamn iceberg. Underneath it, hidden in buried wire transfers, fudged collateral reports, and backdated asset movement forms, I found ties to something much darker, much riskier, and definitely illegal. Jacob had been using the company, not just its funds, but its legal weight, as collateral in several high-risk private investment rings. We're talking about underground asset pools operating in that gray zone where the SEC doesn't just frown, it sharpens its knives. These weren't some wild crypto startups pitched by guys in Patagonia vests. These were shady international consortiums promising insane short-term returns in exchange for temporary liquidity injections, and Jacob had signed off on them using forged co-signatures from my father and documents doctored to look legitimate on the surface. I found one that listed Monroe Supply as a guarantor for a $2.8 million equity backstop. Another one hinted at offshore accounts, nothing confirmed, but enough red flags to build a bonfire. If even half of what I found reached the ears of a federal prosecutor, our family name wouldn't just be dragged through the mud, it would be reduced to ash. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the office, lights off, just me and the cold blue glow of the screen, wondering how much of this my father knew. How much my mother suspected. How many people looked the other way while Jacob played puppet master with every piece of our legacy. By sunrise, I had a folder nearly 3 inches thick, every transaction, every forged approval, every questionable document that could sink us 6 feet under if it ever saw daylight. Around noon, Mom showed up. She hadn't called ahead. She never did. She just appeared like a whisper behind me, holding a paper bag with my favorite deli sandwich inside, the kind she used to pack when I studied for finals in high school. She said nothing at first. Just sat on the edge of the desk, eyes scanning my face like she already knew what I was going to say. When I told her what I'd found, everything, not just the surface lies, she didn't gasp. She didn't ask for proof. She nodded, slow and heavy, and then she whispered the one sentence I'd never expected from her mouth. I always knew he was reckless. I just didn't want to lose both of you. The words hit harder than the data ever could. Because what she meant was clear. She had seen Jacob's ambition, his duplicity, maybe even his dangerous patterns. But silence, to her, was the price of keeping her family intact. A family that, at least in her mind, would crack in half if she ever held her son accountable. And maybe she wasn't wrong. Maybe if I exposed him publicly, dragged the whole thing out under fluorescent courtroom lights, we'd all lose something we could never get back. Our name. Our pride. The fragile threads of blood that still connected us even after everything. But keeping quiet meant complicity. And I wasn't going to carry Jacob's sins on my back just because no one else had the spine to stop him. So I made a decision. That evening, after the office had cleared out and the hallways were echoing with end-of-day stillness, I walked into my father's office. He wasn't there, but I didn't need him to be. I set the folder down right in the center of his desk, made sure the label on the front was bold and unmistakable, Jacob Monroe, Financial Risk File. When he'd see it, he'd know what it meant. There was no note, no explanation, no apology. Just the evidence. The weight of a choice he had refused to make for far too long. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the folder like I was laying a body to rest. Then I said, quietly but clearly, as if he were already in the room, "Here's everything. You can either turn him in or keep pretending." And I walked out. As I stepped into the hallway, past the place where my brother used to parade around like a king, past the door that now bore my name and the future I had never asked for but had claimed anyway, a voice echoed in my head, my own voice, solid and sharp. I never wanted the crown. But if they're gonna hand me the ashes, I might as well build my own damn kingdom. And Jacob? He's still out there. Somewhere. But if he ever comes back, he better read the name on the door.